what we're going to do, we'll get started today, and I'm going to welcome Will Sanders. Thank you for coming and leading our Connects. Will is from the San Francisco Bay Area and currently lives in New York City. He founded Recruiting from Scratch, a recruiting company that works with early stage startups by helping them hire. He also founded CMU Tech and Entrepreneurship to help connect the community, building an entrepreneurial culture, and providing resources for our community to succeed. Previously, he worked at Mojo Vision, an augmented reality contact lens company, where he was head of talent. So, Will, thank you for coming, and I'll let you get started.
Perfect. Thanks, Allison. Well, it's great to see so many people on this this call. Let me go ahead and share my screen, and feel free to ask questions throughout if you do have any questions. And let me go ahead and start. Perfect. Okay, so everyone can see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. All right, so basically one of the things that, that's been very beneficial for me and things I really do every day almost is, and I think I don't like the term, networking, because it, has a lot of bad, I think sometimes bad things behind it. But really talking through, how I've thought about building my network, and really how that's evolved since I've graduated from Carnegie Mellon. Because that was one of the things that, I've had some periods I'll talk about where I didn't have a network, and then how did I get past, that event to, find what's next or feel more comfortable with what's next. So really my background, as Allison said, I'm from the Bay Area, but I graduated from CMU with a BA in economics in 2015, and I then moved to San Francisco. So I was working at just different startups, started my career. One of them in particular was about a 50-person company, Series B. The founder had started many companies before, and a few months into working there, they laid off the entire company. So I was in this point of just starting my career, working, took the chance to work at a startup. I trusted the person I followed, and then all of a sudden, everything I was doing just kind of disappeared. So I was really looking for ways of how do I find what's next and, really leverage, one, CMU as a group. So I started running events, which originally called CMU Entrepreneurs of the Bay Area, basically have a speaker, gather alumni in the area and really just meet other people, in the tech space. But really what I was trying to do was prevent something like that happening again, and, also help others, with this talk, from having that happen to you if it does happen in your career, especially if you do go into startups, because it's not always just a linear line or, up and to the right. There's things that can happen that you want to try to prevent. And another thing I realized was, getting into a role where I could be successful. So one of the things that I always enjoyed doing was building teams, and I found I was a lot better at finding other people jobs than myself. So I ended up working at a small company, also started by a senior grad, called Mojo Vision. And this company is building an augmented reality contact lens. The company was in stealth mode when I joined. There was only a few people working there. But I came into a role to really help build and scale the company. So I grew the company to about 70 people. The company's raised $150 million. End of 2018, I left to figure out what was next, and I ended up starting a recruiting company that worked with early stage startups. So I've done that almost for about 2 years now, on and off, and worked with probably 30 different companies. And simultaneously in 2019, I was really thinking of how do I, expand and build the CMU network, not just for myself again, but for everyone in the community. So really rebranded from Entrepreneurs of the Bay Area to CMU Tech and Entrepreneurship. And I also moved to New York. That's last year, almost about a year ago. Of course, COVID has happened, so that's also changed, networking entirely. There's no longer this spontaneousness to networking in a way, it's a lot more kind of direct in terms of what you can do. And it's also quite changed the landscape for where you can network and what that really means to build your network. And I'll talk about that a bit. Are there any questions before then? Perfect. So I've got and also the picture, I also got a dog during COVID. So now I have an Australian Shepherd puppy. She's a little bigger than that now. So really why are networks helpful? And thinking about this, one of the main things that I'm, is really for myself is finding a new job or new opportunities. So during the time when I was working at that startup, I really, then you kind of get into it's almost a trap of just applying to jobs. And being a recruiter, that can work sometimes, but it is, especially right now, quite a tough market. So really finding a way, to get a new job and feel very comfortable getting a new job. Another one I like to look at is just how do you discover opportunities that you normally wouldn't be able to do? So for myself, during COVID, I took a little bit of a break from recruiting and joined a COVID testing company. And I ended up doing roles in sales, account management, support, and there's more logistics and shipping. A lot of things outside of talent acquisition, and that came from one of my recruiting friends, knew the founder of that company, got an introduction, and just started working there in a contract role. Another one is just new ideas, especially through CMU Tech and Entrepreneurship, if you're familiar with that group. Just really bridging a lot of different industries, a lot of different skill sets, and learning a lot of new ideas. Another one is just funding investment opportunities. Given if you have a startup, usually you're looking for, the first check is from someone that you likely know or get an introduction to. And there's instances I can talk about of that happening too. And the last one is speaking opportunities. Without knowing Dave, and Allison, this unlikely I'd be able to speak at something like this or share this knowledge. So there's a lot of benefits of networking. I'm sure those are pretty straightforward to yourself. So I'll give some examples of just what I've seen of, networking success, and just kind of show you, for myself and others in particular of why it is helpful. So one of the examples is during COVID, CMU Tech and Entrepreneurship, we went from 1 chapter to 11 worldwide. So one of the chapters is in Los Angeles. And one of the members of that group was looking for people to join his startup. And someone that joined that group was, looking at an offer from Facebook, but got introduced to this person, from the message that was posted in Slack. So in that case, potentially from your network, you can reject a job at Facebook and go join a VR company instead. Another example is I've met alumni from the CMU Tech and Entrepreneurship group, and, through one email introduction, and a few phone calls later, they can have an investment from an alumni, in their startup for, say, $100,000, which I've seen happen multiple times. My example of working at a COVID testing company that was really, truly in hypergrowth, I was able to work there in a role that was outside of talent acquisition. And then, of course, for my business that I'm building, through my network, I've just worked with a lot of different heads of talent at startups, and also just from founders that are growing their company. And it's turned into a lot of just opportunities for myself to grow my business and work with them directly. And then kind of looking at the foundations of networking of how I think about it. So really, networking is really the long game. So a lot of these interactions, especially as you go into some industries, you're going to see the same people. You really don't know what happens years later, in some sense, where they want you to work with them in the future. And then that leads to some opportunity that wouldn't have been there before. I also like to think of it as not keeping score. So if you're thinking about networking as a trading off one favor for the next, that's just not something that I keep in mind, right? There's, if you do give goodwill to one person, that will come back to you in some other form, later on. And a thing that I also have not seen people do sometimes is they'll reach out and then there's a follow-up that comes from it. So making sure that you do have a conversation and following up, an appropriate amount of time. Given at times you're reaching out to someone that's quite busy, so you want to make it, one, very, very easy for them to respond by having a very simple ask, but making sure you do follow up on that call, and checking in, which goes with, you're really playing the long game. So you want to make sure you build these relationships over time. And then one of those conversations really can, change the direction of your life, which in some cases before where it makes you decline your offer at Facebook to work at a startup, or something that you truly never would have thought of doing. Perfect. And now more to the practical side of, how do we start doing this? So really what I like to think about is, what is the goal of networking that you're going for? For myself, a lot of it now is really building my recruiting business and finding opportunities related to that business. So a lot of it is business development. So once you map out the goal of, is it getting X amount of clients, in the future, is it getting promoted, whatever that may be, you want to make sure you keep that in mind. The next is, I've always, just been a fan of using LinkedIn. I am able to cheat a little bit by using LinkedIn Recruiter. So I have, entire access to LinkedIn. And I leverage that for a lot of other things besides my business, but usually you can get a free month of LinkedIn Recruiter. And then using a lot of filters is always the best place to go. So if you're on LinkedIn and, filtering by one college, is usually the best place to start for me, or anything that, maybe a slight acquaintance. It could be a fraternity, it could be, high school, it could be something you're doing outside of Carnegie Mellon itself. So there's a lot of ways of finding some connection. And then really, I like to look at it as a cold message or the cold email. So first you're introducing yourself, why are you reaching out? And especially as students, people are very forgiving and they're not, I would say D is something you don't need to worry about as much, but, really introducing yourself, why you reached out, what is your connection? And then I usually just like to think of it as you're reaching out, to set up a phone call and learn more about themselves. In some cases, if you have something that can benefit them, then that's helpful. An example of this is starting CMU Tech and Entrepreneurship. It was, I would call it a easy way to make connections for Carnegie Mellon alumni, which could be, a very busy founder, someone in venture, a senior executive at a company. I could reach out with them, and build that relationship, with also benefiting them by allowing them to have a speaking opportunity, to give back to the university they attended, something like that. So I would always recommend, if you can find a way to build something, simultaneously, that's always a huge, huge benefit. And the last one is, if you're reaching out, in particular, especially if you're familiar with, if you've done banking or consulting, kind of looking for a job, you're doing a lot of phone calls. And, the key is, don't ask for a job. Unless that call goes really well, you can ask at the end, but don't ask immediately. Someone is on the phone with you and realize that, you're competent, that you have these skills, they'll be very willing to refer you to whatever job it is. But just make sure that's not very obvious as your main intention on that phone call. And kind of looking at, given this is practical tools for networking, what do I use to mostly find people, if I'm looking at a specific company, the first thing I'll always do is find, now just my direct connection, through CMU or something like that, some organization that's quite strong that I can, tie them into it. And LinkedIn is still the best place that I've found to do something like that. If you're looking to find an email, there's a lot of tools out there. I've always used a tool. It's built for recruiting, but it's called Gem. It basically allows you to really find anyone's email, especially in tech, and it's usually their personal email. So it's quite a good tool for doing that. I've always used a email tracker if I'm sending any email. One, just to make sure I'm sending it to the right email, if they have opened it, or if it doesn't get opened, making sure you can follow up. But also bringing data into any equation that I'm doing, right? So making sure you're able to be very targeted now with networking. As I mentioned, it's not as spontaneous as it used to be with going to an in-person event and somewhat guessing about who you're talking to. And then on the other side of what other tools can you leverage, and one of the things that I built with others, CME Tech and Entrepreneurship. So that's a great place to introduce yourself to the community, really build a strong network of, now there's thousands of alumni involved in that, and really meet a lot of different people in tech or someone interested in entrepreneurship. There's other tools like Lunch Club, which is made for one-on-one direct connections. And then there's industry groups. If you are, working in a specific industry, I would always recommend looking at the groups there. For talent acquisition, there's different Slack channels or Slack spaces that exist that have thousands of members, and a really great place to, meet people doing something similar to yourself. And then thinking about how is remote, how it changes networking. And one thing now that maybe most of you are realizing now, given we're not even, in Pittsburgh doing this talk, I've worked remotely the past few years, but looking at it as location, really doesn't matter now. So with that in mind, basically, people can be anywhere and you can have a conversation, whether it's, one example is there is a CMU alum from the Middle East chapter, who is in Nigeria. And he was building out his consulting business. And I had met someone in Boston from CMU who was building out their consulting business in product development. And, making that connection, given they both are looking for different things, but they basically match together and able to have that conversation. And that's just done via email. And it doesn't matter where they're located. And especially now as more jobs go remote, location, it doesn't really matter. And really all things are instantaneous. So you're really able to do things a lot faster than you would have done before, where things can move very quickly, in the sense of if you're doing a sales call, things can be sped up a lot faster, especially on enterprise sales, given you no longer need to physically travel anywhere. People are more receptive to just being remote and having things work quickly. One of the some of the downsides and benefit is spontaneous networking is harder. There's things, different platforms that are being created or Zoom breakout rooms, but it's really hard to have somewhat spontaneous networking or just running, meetings somewhere, someone even on campus now, given that's not entirely possible. So kind of thinking about how is the networking changing, and you can be more proactive and really targeted, know exactly who you're targeting, instead of guessing, given that's where I leverage LinkedIn. And kind of the last thing I'm looking at is, all community is digital now. So with the lack of in-person events, really getting involved in different communities, like CME Tech and Entrepreneurship or some Slack group, and really starting to build that network and getting involved. Those are hugely beneficial, and it's, quite easy to do from anywhere. Throwing an event is easier than it ever has been. It doesn't cost any money. So you're really able to, build community from scratch in a lot simpler ways than you would have before. but it also, can be quite challenging at the same time, given that you're missing that physical aspect. Yeah. So for the work I've done, I know that was quite a quick presentation. So for the work I've done, recruiting from scratch, if you want to check out the website. And then, of course, CME Tech and Entrepreneurship, cmete.io. And I'll open it up for questions if anyone has specific questions on anything. Happy to answer those now.
Do we have any questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah, so after the first interaction, usually with a lot of people that happens through networking, how do you sustain communication with them, given the nature of these connections? Like they are spread out, and you're not necessarily interacting with them regularly. So how do you sustain these relationships and connections to network better throughout?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and it differs per person. So some connections that I've made, it could be sending a particular article or something that you've read, that's relevant maybe to a conversation you've had before. It's making sure if there's been some achievement. For some of my friends, if they change jobs, I'll text them directly rather than send an email. But really making sure, even if it has been 6 months, if it's more of an acquaintance, then you're able to kind of sustain that relationship. So it just kind of depends on the person, itself. Do you have a specific example of anything, or any more detail about kind of going into that?
Yeah, that helps. I was wondering, I recently attended a conference and got to meet different people there, and we all connected on LinkedIn. But after the conference, we haven't really kept up with each other, and it's quite challenging to stay in touch with so many people that you meet at conferences. But I felt like I need to take more effort in doing that. So I just wanted to know how to go about these.
Yeah, so that's one of the things I tried to solve with CME Tech and Entrepreneurship. So with that group, really allows you to, one, kind of take the initiative, of building and kind of curating events that someone else could attend, or some type of programming that they can attend. So you're able to, guide the conversation that way by basically, one of the things that I try to do is, whenever you reach out to someone, is I'll try to have something in that they can, utilize themselves, whether it's an event, it's maybe a product that's useful, something like that. Which in that case, if you're, able to build content for them, and give it back to them, then that's always the most beneficial way. So say for the conference, if you got involved in a, industry group that's similar to it, that then throws events, you can invite them to that event, and sustain that relationship. That's always been the, easiest way for myself of doing anything, especially with just the easiest example is CME Tech and Entrepreneurship, is having something like that. So that's just try to throw something consistent. It's a little bit harder, you can't invite them, I would say, like a lunch or something where you could invite everyone if they're in the same location. That's a good way of doing it too. But, now it could just be a simple virtual hangout or something like that, or it could be based around specific ideas that you'd like to talk about.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
if no one has any questions, is anybody interested in doing a pitch for yourself or anything like that? Okay. Well, I guess if we don't have any further questions, thank you for leading this, Will. I think it was
Yep.
a lot of information, and everybody take the survey, and we have more connects for the rest of the semester. If you want to check the calendar and then register for them, we look forward to seeing you.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to reach out to me directly, I put my email in the chat, and also check out cmute.io, and feel free to sign up for any of the Slack groups that are out there, and feel free to get engaged. There's a lot of good events coming up. Also, for those, I think there's 2 later this week or 3. I don't remember this week or next week. Feel free to check those out. But also happy to chat with anyone if you want to reach out directly.
All right, great. Thank you. And